gentlemen. One of the most famous and prolific directors of this century, Alfred Hitchcock, is best known for such legendary films as Psycho, North by Northwest, and To Catch a Thief. And although he lived and worked in Hollywood, did you know that the Bay Area had a special place in his heart? He produced 3 of his greatest masterpieces here, and also had a vacation home in the heart of Santa Cruz called Heart of the Mountain. Heart of the Mountain is located deep in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Those that are not as familiar with the Bay Area usually associate Santa Cruz with beach and surfing culture, but it's got equally stunning redwood mountains. Those that live up here are blessed with this view, but the elevation also provides the ideal environment for growing wine grapes. Heart of the Mountain was first established in 1881 by Pierre Cornwall and his family, and it was sold to Alfred Hitchcock in 1940 as a second vacation home. The Cornwalls grew Cabernet Sauvignon, but when Hitchcock moved in, he tore those all up and grew his own white Riesling grapes. He didn't actually make wine, but sold it to a little vineyard down the way in Livermore called Wente Vineyards. In 1978, the Brassfield family purchased the estate from Hitchcock 2 years before he passed away, and they undertook efforts to preserve the estate to as close to how Hitchcock had it as possible. In 2004, they restarted the winery under the Heart of the Mountains Estates label, and in 2014 retired and sold just the winery portion to Brandon Armitage, a vintner from New Zealand, who now operates it as Armitage Wines. You can sample all of his great wines either down at his tasting room in Aptos or schedule a time to come up here and sample it on the property. Today, I'm meeting a friend up here for a wine tasting. Meet Savannah from Hidden Hollywood. Savannah just moved up here from Los Angeles, and so we're so excited to be able to bring you this collaboration together. And Savannah also has her own YouTube channel called Hidden Hollywood, which I'll link to up here.
Yeah, so I just moved here, and of course my channel is about the golden age of Hollywood, cinema, and forgotten people and stories. So when I was researching places in this area, I stumbled upon her channel, and I realized her Bay Area expertise and some film background that I have, that she also has, would be perfect to do a video together, hence why we're up here in these gorgeous mountains today.
So I understand that Hitchcock discovered this area when he was filming for Rebecca.
Yeah, so Hitchcock filmed Rebecca, and it was actually his first film in America. He was fairly popular in England, and so therefore he came to America, and for Rebecca he wanted it to be a small town so the audience could relate to it. Of course, LA and Hollywood was not that in the early 1940s. So he came up to Santa Rosa, and thus he was able to really put this Bay Area on the map, on his radar. He was definitely personally impartial to this area because the morning fog and the cliffs, the rocky central coast, reminded him of southern England, and he was from there. So the film Rebecca starred Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier. And Joan Fontaine, who was an up-and-coming actress, well, her family lived in Los Gatos, right here down the other side of the mountain. So her parents knew that Hitchcock was looking for a private estate, and it just so happened that a very small Edwardian era built home right up here was for sale, and I believe they bought it for about $40,000 back then, and the Fontaine family was able to provide that connect to this exact area and the Hitchcock family.
3 of Hitchcock's top movies were filmed right here in the Bay Area. And before we get into it, as always, plot spoilers ahead. One of the most well-known has got to be 1958's Vertigo, starring Jimmy Stewart as John Scotty Ferguson, a cop who develops severe vertigo after a colleague falls off a roof while they're chasing a criminal across the building tops of Taylor Street in Nob Hill.
Alfred Hitchcock needed there to be that sense of vertigo, of fear, of paranoia, but it was perfect to be in San Francisco because San Francisco has the up and down hills, the winding spiral streets and staircases and taller buildings and shorter buildings and bridges. It was brilliant to set that in San Francisco, but then on top of it, he chose to set it there because of living in this mountain home, his time in Bodega Bay up in Santa Rosa. He particularly loved the city of San Francisco.
While on medical leave, Scotty is hired by an old friend to keep an eye on the guy's wife, Madeline, played by Kim Novak, who believes that she's been taken over by the spirit of her dead grandmother, Carlotta Valdez. He tells her all around San Francisco, starting at her residence at Brockelbank Apartments in Nob Hill, which, fun fact, also happens to be the residence of the Lady in Red starring Gene Wilder. They then travel to the refined and classical Legion of Honor Museum in Lincoln Park, where Madeline sits and stares at a portrait of Carlotta for hours on end. This is all situated next to a beautiful public golf course, which is adjacent to the Land's End Trail. Speaking of which, the museum would be the perfect photo op detour, and there's a convenient path that leads directly down to the trail from here. They stop in briefly at the historical graveyard in Mission Delores in the Mission District, where she visits Valdez's headstone. The gravestone was a fake movie prop that was left behind by the crew after filming wrapped. And for a while you could visit it in person, but all the tourists tramping through looking at it, not so good for the solemn dignity of the place, so the staff finally removed it. Madeline also drops briefly into Podesta Baldocchi's flower shop on Grant Avenue in the financial district to buy a posy, which now they've moved completely into the 21st century and are only online. Since Baldocchi's, there have been plenty of other retail tenants here, although as you can see, currently, it's empty. And the pivotal scene at Fort Point right below the Golden Gate Bridge when a horrified Scotty watches as Madeline throws herself into the bay. He promptly jumps right in to rescue her, thus sparking a budding romance. Unfortunately, they've blocked this off some time ago, so you can't get quite as close. One of Hitchcock's trademark moves, way before Stanley ever did it in the Marvelverse, was to make cameo appearances in all of his films. In Vertigo, you can see him exiting the shipping offices of Madeline's husband, Gavin Elster, carrying a mysterious trumpet case. Let's see if we can spot him in these next two movies. One could argue that this next Bay Area thriller, The Birds, is more popular than Vertigo. What isn't up for debate, though, is that Hitchcock employed some pretty radical filming methods in it, making this the most controversial of his movies.
Alfred Hitchcock wanted to do a film on a bird attack. See, he owned the rights to a story by Daphne du Maurier, but he didn't want to just put that story on screen. And he was here in his mountain home when he found out that on a beach in Santa Cruz, there was an actual random chaotic bird attack that really happened.
Say, something like this happened in Santa Cruz last year. The town was just covered with seagulls.
So then Alfred Hitchcock was thinking about the time where he was up in the Bodega Bay area. It reminded him of Cornwall and areas of southern England that he had been before. And he needed an area that was a small town that was something other people could identify with. And he loved that its proximity was close to San Francisco, because the theme of the film is urbanization, urban people versus rural versus small town. Bodega Bay was perfect. And it also had just full blue skies and the sand line that was perfect for them to be able to create the images and pre-CGI make that movie magic happen of all those birds attacking.
The Birds stars Tippi Hedren as socialite Melanie Daniels. Now, the average person probably would not have heard of the actress, but you definitely have heard of her kids. She's mother to Hollywood heavyweight Melanie Griffith and grandmother to rising star Dakota Johnson. The movie opens with Tippi walking briskly through Union Square, stopping, ironically, to note the crows gathering above before she ducks into Davidson's pet store. And don't blink, or you'll miss Hitchcock's cameo as he walks out of the store with his two pet schnauzers. Now, that really is Melanie walking on the streets of San Francisco. However, the exterior and interior shots of the store itself were done at a backlot in Universal Studios. And through a clever camera trick, they were able to transition her from the streets of San Francisco to the backlot very seamlessly. In real life, the fictional Davidson's pet shop is located right where the Express is on the corner of Geary and Powell. And the interior of Davidson's was modeled after a real-life pet store that at that time was located at 125 Maiden Lane, which currently is a vacant retail space. At Davidson's, she meets her love interest, Mitch Brenner, played by the dashing Rod Taylor, and she purchases two lovebirds there that she intends to gift him when she finally catches up with him at his family farm in Bodega Bay, which is about an hour and a half north of San Francisco in a little coastal community in Sonoma County. And this is where the bulk of the storyline and filming take place. It's a pretty sleepy little town, and as you can tell, hasn't changed that much since the 50s. Melanie drives into the rustic little town in her city slicker Aston Martin via Bay Hill Road, which is actually just a back road that connects up a bunch of ranches, but fills in for the scenic Highway 1. This scene was filmed about a mile and a half north of the current Sonoma Visitor Center, where as you round the bend, you get a perfect view of Bodega Bay laid out before you. Vertigo was kind of a departure for Hitchcock in that he filmed the majority of it on location. The Birds, however, he was a little bit more to his typical MO, and he shoots a lot of this on a stage where he can control the environmental elements, and then he slides in some background plates of Bodega Bay to set the scene. Like this iconic shot of the school kids running away from the attacking birds. This was shot in the studio with the kids running on a treadmill and birds attached to them, set against Taylor Street. And towards the bottom of Taylor Street, where it dead ends into the coast, you'll see Diekman's grocery store. Hitchcock used a combination of fake birds and live trained birds in order to get this effect, sometimes attaching them by invisible wire to the actors' bodies. Controversially, this is what traumatized Tippi Hedren. Melanie's first stop is to the local schoolhouse where she meets the teacher, Annie Hayworth, who is Mitch's ex-girlfriend and also teacher to Mitch's sister, Kathy. In real life, this is the Potter School, which once did used to be a schoolhouse, but at the time of the filming had been condemned. After filming, it was converted to a community center and then to a guest house, and today it's a private residence. In the movie, Annie's house, located right next to the school, is just a facade, built specifically for filming. After meeting with Annie, Melanie then drives over to the Tides restaurant and wharf to rent a boat to get out to Mitch's farm. This place plays a pretty central role in the movie and shows up several times throughout. Later on, the town residents all shelter in the restaurant to strategize what to do about the crazy bird situation. Mitch Zanuck, the owner of the Tides at the time, was kind of starstruck by Hitchcock and the whole Hollywood thing and agreed to let the production company use this restaurant for free in exchange for three things. One, they had to keep the name of the town as Bodega Bay. Two, they had to name the lead male character Mitch. And three, he got a bit speaking part. Check this out here.
What happened, Mitch? Go hitter. A go?
Bodega Bay still really celebrates their association with the birds. And today, if you go around to some of these filming locations, you'll see some plaques and exhibits commemorating it.
And if you want to know more about the birds, you can jump over from Zine's channel onto my channel, where I just did an episode covering that as well.
1943's Shadow of a Doubt was the first truly American film that Hitchcock ever made, meaning that it centered around American themes and featured prominently American actors. It was during World War II, and due to the wartime restrictions on building materials, he had to do something very un-Hitchcockian and film 100% on location. He and writer Thornton Wilder were looking for that perfect Americana small town to film in, and they found it right here in Santa Rosa when they drove up to Sonoma to do some wine tasting, one of Hitchcock's favorite hobbies.
Hitchcock had a particular love for this area. He had just been here filming his first American film called Rebecca, and only 3 years later came back again to do Shadow of a Doubt.
They used city roads and buildings for filming and even scouted town residents as cast members and extras. Anne, the youngest daughter of the Newtons, was plucked right off the streets. Unlike Bodega Bay, Santa Rosa has grown up considerably since the 1940s, when they only had about 14,000 residents. Today, according to the 2019 census, they have about 177,000. A lot of the buildings have long since been developed over, but a few of the locations do still remain. The Newton family home, where the majority of the action takes place, is still a private residence off McDonald Avenue, lovingly and perfectly maintained in all of its authenticity. That area is now known as the McDonald Historical District, with wide leafy streets and beautiful historical homes. When Hitchcock originally scouted the house, it had an older, out-of-fashion look with faded paint that he thought was perfect for an average American family. But the owner was so excited to have had his house picked out for a Hitchcock flick that when the crew arrived on the first day of filming, they found, to their dismay, that he had painted it and spiffied it up. They had to spend money to age the exterior again, and then more money after they were done filming to restore it to its spick and span condition. The majority of the action centers around Uncle Charlie, who shows up from the big city to liven up their boring and humdrum existence. He arrives on the train from Philadelphia, and here Hitchcock slips in his cameo, or at least the back of his head does. He shows up as a fellow train passenger playing bridge, and of course he's got to be holding the highest hand, a straight flush of spades. The Newtons' oldest daughter, young Charlie, and her dad go and pick him up. And you could see the Hotel La Rose on Firth and Wilson in the background. They arrive here at the Santa Rosa Railroad Depot, where there is a joyous family reunion. With the modernization of the railroad system, this depot no longer operates as a terminal, but trains still run right through here. And here comes a smart train right now. Young Charlie proudly shows off her uncle around town, and the bustling plaza that represents downtown was filmed at Courthouse Square, now renamed Old Courthouse Square. There's lots of scenes of her walking around town, and even a couple where she's not obeying the traffic cop. And the movie eventually comes full circle back here to the railroad depot when the family sees Uncle Charlie off on his trip south down to San Francisco.
And that concludes our programming for this evening. Join us for the next installment of Filmed in San Francisco, when we jump from old Hollywood into new Hollywood with a collection of young adult hits. Good night.